Hello. Welcome to Stories in Focus. My name is Ellouise Schoettler. I'm your Storyteller host today. And the way we play this game here is I have a guest for you. And today I have a really good guest to talk to. Newlin, storyteller, a juggler extraordinaire, and musician. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Ellouise. Good to see you.
Good. It's good to see you. Now, I was thinking some of the things to ask you, a lot of things to ask you, really, but the main thing that was of interest to me is I hear you've been playing around with Shakespeare.
I have. I have an annual residency with the Folger Shakespeare Library. It's called a Teaching Artist Residency, and I've been doing it for about 17 years now. What I do is I go into a DC public high school, the same school every year, Medicare Academic High School, and I work with an English class, an existing English class, not actors, but just English students, and I prepare them for the Folger Secondary School Shakespeare Festival.
Oh, how great.
And I cut a Shakespeare play down to 30 minutes because those are the parameters of the festival. And then I come in once or twice a week and work with the students, and it culminates in a performance on the Folger stage, the Elizabethan stage there.
And you do this in how long?
Well, the residency itself starts in September, but it doesn't really ratchet up until January. Then I do it January, February, and March. So it's 6 months, but it's really 3 months of working on the play. The first 3 months are kind of
What
intro.
play did you do this year?
We did The Merchant of Venice, which is theoretically a comedy, but it's actually kind of a brutal play about anti-Semitism. And yet it's not an anti-Semitic play. It's a play about anti-Semitism.
Well, poor Shylock. You know, he sort of plays that so that if you can't get that out of that play, you've missed the boat, right?
But what's interesting about the play and about working with the students is you can mind the comedy, but then you can switch gears and get into the really serious stuff. But both are available to us in this play, and so we had fun with both.
What age group in high school? What year in high school?
The last several years I've been working with 12th graders, and this year I
cool.
worked with a 12th grade AP English class of 16 students.
16 students, all AP. That means they've had a lot of English in their background. Had they done Shakespeare before? Did they have any grounding in Shakespeare at all?
They had read a couple of Shakespeare plays in their high school career. I think they had read Romeo and Juliet in 9th grade and possibly Julius Caesar. But because it was an AP English class, they read and studied this play, The Merchant of Venice. Often I'll come in with a play that they haven't studied, and so we have to both learn the play and then act the play. This was kind of fun because they had already experienced the studying of the play, and they got to use their knowledge of it to bring it to life, and it gave us a little bit of a jump start.
Oh yeah, because I was just thinking that that's the first Shakespeare play that I know of, because our English teacher in Charlotte, North Carolina used it in the 10th grade.
Really?
Yeah, that was one of the big things was to do The Merchant of Venice. And I was just trying to think how they taught it. Do you think that the methods of teaching Shakespeare has changed over time? I don't think that Miss Reinhardt would have gone with a 30-minute Shakespeare. So the fact that you can even do that, have some of the methods changed?
I think that they are evolving more towards what the Folger would call a performance-based teaching of Shakespeare. And the reason for that is because these are plays, and they're meant to be seen, and they're meant to be spoken and acted. It's very hard to get a play, especially a Shakespeare play, when someone's standing up in front of you, either reading it to you, or even having you read it aloud in your seat. There's something about the actual standing up and playing of the roles that gives the whole thing an understandability.
And you think that because of the other plays they'd had, that they really understood and got the message of Merchant of Venice?
I really think that they did, because young people are smarter than we let on, or than they let on.
Yeah.
Or one of those two.
Somebody doesn't want to know.
Somebody's smarter than we think they are.
Right.
I think it's them. So I give them a lot of credit for both understanding intellectually and being able to understand the feelings behind it. I mean, adolescents are extremely feeling-oriented beings. I mean, I think we all are, but as we get older, maybe some people stuff them a little bit so they can get to work.
Ratchet down. Yeah.
But adolescents are very good at both feeling and expressing those feelings, and that's why performing Shakespeare is a great outlet and a great learning tool.
Didn't you tell me one time that you studied drama? So did you study directing? Were you aiming all along to being a director?
Excuse me. Well, I wasn't aiming to be a director for the first part of my career, which was as a kind of a jester.
Yeah.
And I traveled and performed at Renaissance festivals with a lot of juggling and comedy and poetry.
And on the streets of Paris.
Yes. Everybody has to start somewhere.
Yeah, right.
But after about 10 years performing at Renaissance festivals, I did go to graduate school at the University of Maryland, and I studied theater. And because they had a directing track for a master's degree, that struck my interest because it seemed like a practical skill that you could learn and then use. Whereas we all know that acting is completely impractical.
Well, how about juggle? No, juggling could be very practical. Good.
The thing is, I had spent a lot of time performing, and it was nice to be on the other side of it. And working with young people is a real gift because they give me something when they put the play on that I could never do by myself.
Sure. Well, don't you feel, or do you feel rather, that being a performer and a seasoned performer, you know, from a young age now and then directing, that your performance skills are something that helps you work with young people?
I think so, because I've been on the performance side of it long enough to understand both the challenges and the rewards that come with performing. And so I can understand how they might have stage fright and how it might seem like an insurmountable challenge to put on a Shakespeare play when you've never acted before. But on the other hand, I've seen how it can be done, and I believe that it can be done. And so if I believe it,
well,
then
now
maybe
this
they
is,
will too.
did you say your 17th year?
Yeah.
So you've got 17. What's your favorite play to have produced? Outside of this just recent one.
It's the one I'm working on is always a favorite.
Yeah.
But my favorite Shakespeare play is Twelfth Night, which actually we're taking the students to see at the Folger this year. I like it because it's very bittersweet. Like Merchant of Venice, it has a very sad side, but also a hysterical side. I also like it because it has a lot of music in it. Mm-hmm. It has song and music, and it's just a very touching play. But the great thing about Shakespeare is that every time I work on a Shakespeare play, it becomes that more rich to me, having put it to life with the students.
Right. Well, and what our audience, if they don't know you, Nick Newlin, that you perform musically. You are a storyteller, as you're going to demonstrate here, telling one of your original stories in a few minutes. And you are a festival and school performer. So you bring all of that that you can draw on to help those students, you know, really do a good job.
Well, that's what's nice about having more than one experience in life, is that you have a little toolbox.
Yeah.
And having gone to school for theater, I have that toolbox, and then having performed on the streets of Paris, that's a whole other toolbox.
How about the music?
Well, the music is very important to me. It's always been something I've loved, and I perform music kind of not for a living, but as part of my living. In other words, I play the accordion in the show that I do for kids, and when I do it with my wife Joanne, she plays a musical saw. But ever since I was about 17 years old, I've also played in rock bands.
Look how you just ran right over that. She plays the musical saw. Did you get that? Go ahead.
She plays it magnificently too.
Yeah.
It sounds like the wind through the trees.
Oh, neat. And so now you're talking about you playing with a group?
I play for fun with rock bands, and the bands that I play with usually perform, you know, maybe 5 or 6 times a year. So it's not one of those things where every week I have to pack up all the gear and go to a club. There's a colleague of mine, a friend, who has what's called field parties out in Frederick, Maryland. And on Memorial Day, Labor Day, 4th of July, other special events, Halloween, he'll have 4 or 5 local bands out to his farm in Frederick. And one of them is a band that actually is a professional band and draws. The rest of them are weekend warriors, and I fall into that category. But I enjoy playing with other people and learning new music, and it's a social thing, but it's also a way expressing myself musically.
You just touched on something that Donald Davis is a storyteller that you and I both know. And I read recently someplace a reminder of a quote of his that what he does is he doesn't do storytelling for a living. He lives while he's telling stories. And that sounds very close to what you are saying.
You know, it is lovely when you can do something that you enjoy, and it seems to go with the flow of your life, and you might be doing it anyway, and then at some point you get a paycheck. That's kind of a miracle.
Yes, it is.
Not a huge paycheck, but a paycheck nonetheless.
Right. How are you finding things in the school these days? You know, we're getting reports of funding cuts and all of this kind of stuff. You know, how serious is this from the performer's standpoint?
Well, I think it's getting better. I think that we've had a rough 4 or 5 years in the economy, and certainly, especially a couple of years ago, there were some regular engagements that I did that were no longer having those events because they had to cut the budget somewhere, and so they decided that entertainment was going to go, which of course is wrong. It's just wrong.
Just plain wrong.
But
yes.
I feel like particularly this year things are picking up, and you know, talking to my other people, my friends and colleagues who perform in schools, the economy we've taken a hit from the economy, but I'm confident that's on the upswing and that people are going to continue to need entertainment in the schools.
Well, let's hope so. I think that the other thing to be concerned about in the schools vis-a-vis the entertainment is whether or not the students have access to being taught music and art and those sort of things. You know, do you get a feeling for what's happening? Are they cutting out? Or are they being touched in the level of instruction?
I think they continue to be, and I think it's because of the commitment of artists and the commitment of artists to work their art form into the vocabulary that the schools require, to make it a part of the Common Core, to make the vocabulary of art something that can be graded, which is anathema to performers usually.
Yeah.
But that's what schools require. They require that it can be quantified, that you can have levels of skill that are learned and that can be incorporated into the same rubrics that they use in schools. So you have to learn the language that schools use and bring your art to them.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it just doesn't help to say that you're waiting for your muse. You know, that the arts are work. They're creative, and it comes, you know, from somewhere, you know, from your spark. But basically, practice, 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 and all those things, it's work. What do you think?
There are actual tools and building blocks in art, just the way there are in the learning of a language, the learning of math, the learning of a craft. There are things one must learn. I could never improvise on the piano if I hadn't learned all of my scales, arpeggios, and chords, major and minor and diminished, in every single key, and that took me years.
Yeah, yeah. Do you ever give that information to students? Do you share that out?
All the time. I try not to say it heavy-handedly, and I try and demonstrate it, but I try and let them know. And the main thing is that if you're enjoying your work, work can be fun, but you still have to do it. You still have to do it.
Practice, practice, practice.
So there's a fine balance. You want to keep the joy in it, but you have to buckle down, and I try and show that by example.
Oh, Nick, now that was really interesting, and I'm so sorry to do this, but we're going to take a break right now and come back in just a few minutes. Don't you go away, because Nick will be back to tell you a story.
What do we have here?
You take Medicare, don't you?
Sure.
And you probably have a lot of patients who are ready to go on Medicare, yes?
Yes.
You know, you could tell them that if they're 65, they can go to socialsecurity.gov and apply for Medicare online. It takes less time than sitting in a doctor's office. It's less than 10 minutes. It's quite easy.
For my 11th birthday, I got a bike. But it was no ordinary bike. It was a 5-speed Stingray with the banana seat and a little wheel in the front with streamers on the handlebars. It reminded me of the chopper on the poster on my wall, of Peter Fonda from the movie Easy Rider, except for Peter Fonda wore leather pants and I wore bell-bottoms. But when I rode my chopper down Reno Road in Washington, D.C. to Mrs. Baldwin's house, I was the Easy Rider. Mrs. Baldwin was my piano teacher. She was a warm-hearted, white-haired woman in her late 60s. I was a pretty good piano student, but I never really fully learned to read sheet music. Mrs. Baldwin had to play the classical pieces several times for me, and I would gradually pick them up until I could learn to play them. But I never played the classical pieces the same way twice, which was okay for the in-house concerts at Mrs. Baldwin's. But in 8th grade, all of Mrs. Baldwin's students had to go downtown to a big hall for the International Bach Festival. We all put our coats and ties on, and one by one, Mrs. Baldwin's students went up to the stage to play their Bach pieces. When it was my turn to play my piece, I strode up to the stage and put my sheet music down in front of me and began to play. I got stuck, and I couldn't go any further, and my sheet music was of no help to me. So I threw on a little improvised ending, and I scurried back to my seat. At least it was over. Play it again. Who said that? Play it again. It was one of the judges. A woman in the front of the room, a mean-looking woman with a brown suit on. Bach doesn't hate you. You shouldn't hate Bach. Please go up to the stage and play your piece again. I do hate Bach, and I hate you, and I hate my coat and tie, and that brown suit looks ugly on you. I didn't say any of that, but I wanted to. Instead, I strode back up to the stage, more like skulked, with all eyes upon me, and some middle school titters emanating from the audience. And I played my piece again, stumbling over that same part, but somehow making it through. This time it really was over. But it was a long car ride back to my parents' house, because the easy rider can't ride his chopper wearing a coat and tie. Mrs. Baldwin could tell that I'd been traumatized, so she started me up on Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag. It put a little bit of the joy back into playing music. And the following year, I went off to boarding school to St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire, where I took piano for credit with Mr. Lequier. Mr. Lequier was a burly man with a brown mustache. Looked like he'd had harder jobs in his life than piano teacher. His mustache looked like a hairbrush, and he kept pulling at it as if he were trying to remove it from his face. It was almost as if in middle age, Mr. Lequier had made the conscious choice to look goofy rather than look handsome. And I admired him for that. Mr. Lequier started me up on Chopin, Opus 28, No. 4, a prelude in E minor. I still hadn't learned to read sheet music, so Mr. Lequier had to play the piece for me several times until I gradually picked it up. And when I first started to play the piece back for him, he stopped me, and he asked me, "How do you think Chopin felt when he wrote that piece of music?" I shrugged my shoulders and replied, "I don't know, happy?" Mr. Lequier arched his eyebrow as if he knew something I did not, and he sent me back to my dorm room to practice the piece. And he said, "I want you to practice this piece of music, and when you come back to me, I want you to show me how Chopin was feeling when he wrote the piece of music." That seemed like a good idea, and I was ready to do it. But the next day, my friend Peter Mitnock accidentally slammed my shoulder into the ground in a wheelbarrow race, and I broke my collarbone. My spring was ruined. I couldn't run, I couldn't swim, and I couldn't play the piano. Also, I was taking piano for credit, so I had to go to Mr. Halsey, the head of the music department, and tell him about my situation. Mr. Halsey was a mean and stiff man, and when I told him that I had broken my collarbone and I couldn't play my recital, he said, "You should have been thinking about your recital when you entered that wheelbarrow race. I have no choice but to give you an F in the course." An F? I had never even gotten a C at St. Paul's School. I was a good student. What a jerk. I went back to my dorm room and I cranked up the Rolling Stones as loud as I could on my stereo. But if you try sometime, you'll find you get what you need. Thank God for rock and roll. I went back to my piano teacher, Mr. Lequier, and I told him what Mr. Halsey had said to me. Mr. Lequier would have none of it. He turned to me with fire in his eyes, and he pulled on his mustache, and he said, "You and I are going to play that piece together. You're going to play the right hand, and I'm going to play the left hand." And we practiced together as a team for 3 weeks. But when the piano recital rolled around, I was still nervous because I couldn't forget that day at the Bach Festival. Mr. Lequier and I put on our coats and ties. We sat down at the piano, and the students started filing into the auditorium. My friends, the rest of the students. I could see the headmaster at the back of the room, along with Mr. Halsey standing stiffly. Mr. Lequier and I turned to each other. We began to play. Chopin's Opus 28, number 4, has a mysterious legato melody with major and minor chords. And there's a section near the end where the music leaps up and cries out. And when Mr. Lequier and I got to that part of the piece of music, we bore down together on the piano keyboard. Da 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 da. Mr. Lequier and I disappeared into the music. There was enough room in there for both of us. There was room in the music for my anger at all the Mr. Halseys and brown-shirted judges of the world. There was room in the music for my sorrow at my first broken bone. There was room for whatever Mr. Lequier was going through, and everybody else in the auditorium, and what Chopin himself was going through, and everybody who would ever listen to that piece of music, living or dead. Wow. There was a lot of room in the music. Unbeknownst to me, that was the last classical piano recital I ever played, because the following day, my friend Charlie King heard me practicing blues licks with one hand on an organ in the basement of the chapel, and he invited me to join his rock band, the Chanying Mongees, because their keyboard player, Ian White, could only play classical music, but he could not rock. And I've been playing rock and roll keyboards for the last 35 years. And the Chanying Mongees and I play at every one of our 5-year St. Paul School reunions. And our middle-aged classmates look upon us as gods. I can't tell you how Chopin was feeling when he wrote that piece of music. But I can tell you how I feel when I play with the Chanying Mongees. I feel like the Easy Rider. It was Mr. Lequier who taught me that you can feel like the Easy Rider even when playing Chopin. You just have to feel it. Meanwhile, in the St. Paul School recital hall, Mr. Lequier and I came down together from that high note. There was a moment of complete silence in the hall, and then our two hands descended in perfect unison on the piano for that final minor chord. As the crowd burst into applause, Mr. Lequier smiled, and he pulled on his mustache, and he looked at me, and he said, "I think you understand the Chopin." Thank you.
There are so many fun things we all can do to be healthier, no matter who you are or where you are. So let's move.
And we're underway.
Let's stretch in the grass.
And we're ready to go.
Let's play tag.
What a play!
Let's jump up and down.
What a way to finish it!
And most of all, let's eat better so that we have the energy we need to play an hour a day, every day.
Anyone can play. Just go to letsmove.gov to learn more.
Hi, welcome back. Now, wasn't that fun having Nick tell us that story? Thanks.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you, Ellouise.
Yeah, it was fun. I want you to talk to us about the story and how you came up with it. How old were you, basically, when that story was taking place?
The first part of the story took place when I was an 11-year-old kid, so I was in about 7th grade. And I had been taking piano lessons for several years, but it was the first time I had to do a serious piano recital, that Bach festival. And because I kind of crashed and burned a little bit, it stuck in my memory. But I do have to credit my piano teacher, Mrs. Baldwin, for immediately putting the fun back into music by getting me into Scott Joplin. I think that probably a lot of kids, when they have experiences like that, they just throw their hands up and go, piano is not for me, because it was
Right.
so painful. But the thing is, I actually liked piano. I just didn't like that experience.
No, of course not. Well, the other thing, though, is what I was thinking about was when you're developing your stories, and you do a number of personal stories, when you're developing that, was there a particular memory or something that set you to pick that story up out of your memory?
I think it was, and it was the painful memory of the Bach Festival, but it was also simultaneously the triumphant memory of Mr. Lequier and I playing together at St. Paul's School.
That is nice. That's
Because
nice.
it could have ended badly with the wrong piano teacher, and I could have then maybe really stopped playing music because I would have gotten an F in the course and not gotten back on my horse, as it were.
That's right. That's right.
So in a way, even though I don't talk very much about Mrs. Baldwin and talk some about Mr. Lequier, they're very important parts of the story, because in both of those instances, I had grown-ups there to help guide me through the wilderness of music, which, like anything that you're learning, can be fraught with fear and insecurity. But they put the feeling into it for me and made me want to go on because of that.
Right. See, I was so touched during the story when Mr. Lequier, said, we'll play this together, that that I think that anybody listening to that will touch base with some memory that they had from childhood that's not necessarily playing the piano, but it's when they needed an adult or a teacher somehow to touch base with and to help them through.
We can't go through this life alone. We need allies.
That's
And when you're a kid, you need allies who know what they're doing.
Yes.
and that is often grown-ups. And now that I'm a grown-up and I work with kids, I try and convey to them that I am their ally and that I'm not going to let them crash and burn. And as I was mentioning in our prior conversation, I try and do it by example, but I also try and tell them outright.
Right.
You can call me or text me, as is the case, if you need something, because I'm available.
See, aren't his students lucky? That's wonderful. And I am so sorry, Nick, that we're going to have to close our conversation. It's always fun to be here, and especially with you. I like that conversation. And you'll come back. There'll be another storyteller here in a couple of weeks, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you.
I look up to a lot of the older heads, the innovators, the heads of the art movements of the past. They kept it really edgy, and like a lot of the Latin American muralists and Latin American artists, and their styles were very unique and new to their time. Somewhat controversial, but that's who I look up to mainly. Personally, I'm very excited about going to college. It's something new and it's something different than what I'm used to. I'm definitely going to be a little out of my element, but that's what makes it so exciting, is that, it's something fresh. Well, there's so many opportunities that I think I could miss out on if I didn't go, Getting into college takes planning and vision. It's just like when I take a brick wall and turn it into a canvas for my art. Paintings help me realize that I've got what it takes.
When you're on this team, you learn to never give up.
Even if you're down, third-string quarterback, clock ticking,
Hostile environment.
exhausted, you can never lose hope.
There are over 13 million people in the Horn of Africa affected by famine, war, and drought that are counting on us for help.
More people affected than the population of New York City,
And Los Angeles combined.
and we can't give up.
Please go to this site and forward the facts about this crisis to everyone you know.
Do more than donate.
Forward the facts.
When you throw away money on wasted electricity, you're throwing away everything you could have bought with it. Saving energy saves you money.
The average text takes your eyes off the road for nearly 5 seconds. At highway speeds, that's enough time to travel the length of a football field. Stop the texts.